It was almost midnight when the old landline phone rang in the small house at the edge of town. Lila was sitting at her desk, finishing lesson plans for her students. She was a quiet woman, the kind people often forgot were in the room until she spoke. Her life was simple: school in the morning, chores in the evening, and her mother's calls at night. But that night's call changed everything. Her mother's voice was trembling. "Lila, come to the city hospital. It's about your sister." Lila froze. "What happened? Is Sonia okay?" There was a long silence on the other end, only the sound of her mother's uneven breathing. Then she whispered, "There's been an accident, hurry." Lila didn't remember how she got dressed or how she reached the bus stop. The night felt endless. The bus rumbled through the dark roads, its headlights slicing through the rain. Her heart pounded with fear, her thoughts tangled in every memory of her sister, her laughter, her confidence, her expensive perfume. Sonia had always been the shining one. She was beautiful, bold, and lived the kind of life Lila never dared to dream about. When Lila reached the hospital, she found her mother sitting on a metal bench outside the emergency ward. Her face was pale, her hands clutching her purse as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Ma," Lila whispered, touching her shoulder. Her mother looked up, eyes red and swollen. "She's inside. The doctors are trying. And the other person?" Lila asked. Her mother hesitated. "A man. He was driving. They said his name is Armin Verma." The name meant nothing to Lila, but the way her mother said it, like it carried weight, made her uneasy. Hours passed. The rain outside slowed, but inside the hospital, time stood still. Lila brought her mother tea, but neither of them drank it. Around dawn, a doctor finally came out, removing his gloves with a tired sigh. "Sonia is stable for now," he said. "She's in a coma, but she's breathing on her own." Lila let out a shaky breath of relief, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her mother murmured a prayer under her breath. Then the doctor continued, "The man who was with her. He's in a deeper coma. His condition is critical. Are you related to him?" "No," her mother said quickly. "We don't even know him." The doctor frowned. "Strange. His ID says Armin Verma. His mother has been asking for someone from Sonia's family. She said it's urgent." Lila and her mother exchanged confused looks. Before they could ask more, a nurse arrived to guide them to another room. There, in a private waiting area, sat an older woman in a wheelchair. Her hair was silver, but her eyes were sharp and commanding. Two men in business suits stood beside her. As soon as she saw them, the woman said, "You must be Sonia's family." "Yes," Lila's mother said softly. "I'm her mother. This is her sister, Lila. Who are you?" The woman's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "I'm Mrs. Verma. Armin is my son." Lila blinked. The name clicked. Armin Verma, the businessman who owned half the city's construction projects. She had seen his photo once in a newspaper. It was hard to imagine that man, strong, confident, lying helpless in a hospital bed. Mrs. Verma continued, "Your daughter Sonia was engaged to my son." Lila's mother gasped. "Engaged? That's impossible. Sonia never told us anything." Mrs. Verma nodded slowly. "It was a secret. They met at a charity event months ago. Armin wanted to keep it quiet until they were ready to announce it. I didn't approve of it at first, but when I saw how happy he was, I agreed." Lila's mother covered her mouth, speechless. Lila could only stare. Her sister had hidden an entire engagement from her family and to a millionaire. Mrs. Verma sighed deeply. "The problem is, the media will find out soon, and if they do, they will twist the story. They'll say horrible things about Sonia, about my son. I can't let that happen." Her tone softened as she looked at Lila. "Armin's company is already in crisis. The board is trying to take control. If they find out he's in a coma and unmarried, they'll remove him completely." Lila frowned. "What does that have to do with us?" Mrs. Verma's gaze didn't waver. "Everything. The only way to protect his position and your sister's dignity is for the marriage to happen. Immediately." Lila's mother looked confused. "But how?" "Sonia is in a coma." The room fell silent. The air grew heavy. Then with calm certainty, Mrs. Verma said, "Then her sister will take her place." Lila stared, thinking she had misheard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mrs. Verma said gently, "you will marry my son. Legally. The papers will show that the marriage happened as planned. We can handle the rest quietly. Lila's mother shook her head in shock. That's impossible. Lila can't marry a man she doesn't know. Mrs. Verma leaned forward, her voice trembling but firm. Please, this is not just about money or business. It's about saving Sonia's name. The media will destroy her if they think she was with a man without marriage. I'm begging you. I'll take care of everything. No one needs to know the truth except us. Lila felt dizzy. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. She wanted to speak, to refuse, but her voice wouldn't come out. She looked at her mother, who sat frozen in silence. I can't, Lila whispered finally. I can't marry someone who's unconscious. Mrs. Verma's eyes filled with tears. Please, child. You would be saving both families. Armand's company, your sister's reputation. Everything depends on this. Just a simple ceremony, legal enough to protect us all. I promise when things settle you can walk away. Lila couldn't breathe. She excused herself and stepped out into the hospital corridor. The smell of antiseptic filled her nose. Nurses walked by, whispering. Her mind was spinning. How could Sonia have hidden something like this? How could her life suddenly become a part of this chaos? Her mother followed her out, wiping her eyes. Lila, she said softly, I know it sounds impossible, but maybe we should do it. Lila turned sharply. Do what? Marry a stranger in a coma? Her mother looked down. Think about Sonia. People will ask questions. They'll gossip. You know how our relatives are. And if this woman is telling the truth, then Sonia's future, her honor, is at risk. We can't let her name be dragged through the mud. Lila stared at her. But what about my life, Ma? Her mother didn't answer. She just whispered, Sometimes we must sacrifice for the people we love. The words stung more than Lila expected. She looked back at the room where Mrs. Verma waited. The old woman was crying silently now, clutching her son's photograph. By evening, the decision was made, not because Lila wanted it, but because everyone around her insisted it was the right thing to do. Papers were drawn. Lawyers came and went. The hospital chaplain was called quietly to a private ward. As Lila stood there in a plain sari, a garland in her trembling hands, she felt like her body was made of glass. Her mother stood beside her, eyes glistening with pride and fear. Mrs. Verma watched from her wheelchair, whispering prayers. The ceremony was brief. No music, no smiles, no celebration. Just two people, one standing, one lying unconscious, joined by a few words and signatures. When the priest said, "You are now husband and wife," Lila looked at the man on the bed. Tubes ran from his arms to blinking machines. His face was calm, peaceful, almost distant. She wondered what kind of man he had been before all this. Kind or cold, warm or proud. She realized she might never know. After the ceremony, Mrs. Verma placed her wrinkled hand over Lila's. "Thank you, my daughter," she said with tears. "You've saved us all. You've done what even fate couldn't." Lila forced a weak smile, unsure what she had really saved. That night she sat by Armand's bedside long after everyone had gone. The hospital was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitor. She watched his chest rise and fall, his face expressionless. She whispered softly, "I don't know who you are or what my sister saw in you, but I hope you wake up soon, because I don't know how to live this lie." Her voice broke and tears rolled down her cheeks. She hadn't cried like this in years. She missed her old life, her students, her small classroom, her routine. Now she was trapped in a story that didn't belong to her. Days turned into weeks. Lila stayed mostly in the hospital, helping Mrs. Verma with small things, signing papers, and pretending to be the calm new bride the world thought she was. Reporters tried to dig for news, but Mrs. Verma's lawyers kept them away. Sometimes, late at night, Lila would visit Sonia's ward. She would sit beside her sister, hold her hand, and whisper, "You have to wake up, Sonia. This isn't my life, it's yours. Please wake up and fix it." But Sonia lay still, her face pale and peaceful as if in deep sleep. One evening, Mrs. Verma called Lila into her room. "You must move into Armand's house," she said gently. "The board members are coming next week. They must see that the marriage is real." Lila hesitated. "But I don't know anything about him. Or the company." Mrs. Verma smiled faintly. "You'll learn. You're stronger than you think." Lila looked at the older woman, realizing she wasn't asking, she was telling. The weight of responsibility pressed harder on Lila's chest. That night, as she packed her small bag, her mother hugged her tightly. "Be brave, Lila. Everything will be fine." Lila nodded, though her heart didn't believe it. She left the hospital early the next morning, riding in the back seat of a black car that carried her away from everything familiar. As the city skyline faded behind her, she wondered if this was how people felt when they walked into a storm, knowing they couldn't turn back, but hoping somehow they'd survive. When the car stopped in front of the Verma mansion, Lila stepped out slowly. The building was enormous, surrounded by gardens and tall iron gates. It looked more like a museum than a home. The servants opened the door, their eyes curious and cautious. They bowed slightly, but their expressions said everything. They didn't believe she belonged there. Inside, the marble floors reflected the chandelier lights. Paintings of ancestors lined the walls. Every sound echoed. Lila felt small, out of place, as if she were trespassing. Mrs. Verma's nurse guided her to a room. "This is yours now," she said kindly. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window. From there, she could see the city lights twinkling far away. Everything felt unreal. She whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees. Somewhere inside the house, Mrs. Verma spoke quietly to the butler, giving instructions. She is his wife now. Treat her with respect, but even she didn't know what destiny had just set in motion. Lila, the quiet schoolteacher, had stepped into a life built on secret sacrifice, and a sleeping stranger who might one day wake up and change everything. The car stopped in front of the tall iron gates of the Verma mansion. The driver got out and opened the door for Lila. She stepped out slowly, clutching her small bag to her chest. The air smelled different here, heavy with roses and rain-polished stone. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the grand house before her. It didn't feel real. Only a few weeks ago, she was a simple teacher in a small town. Now people called her the wife of a millionaire who lay unconscious in a hospital bed. The thought made her heart twist in confusion. She had never even seen Armand smile, never spoken to him, and yet legally, she was bound to him by marriage papers signed under hospital lights. The gates opened with a slow creak, and a tall man in a black suit greeted her at the door. "Welcome, madam," he said with a polite bow. His voice was flat, his eyes unreadable. Lila tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. "Thank you," she whispered. Inside, the mansion was silent except for the sound of her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The walls were covered with large paintings, portraits of men and women with the same sharp features as Armand. She felt their eyes following her as she walked. A young maid came forward, her expression stiff. "This way, madam. I will show you to your room." As Lila followed her up the wide staircase, she could feel the coldness in the air, not just from the marble, but from the people. The servants greeted her respectfully, but none smiled. It was clear they didn't see her as the rightful lady of the house. Her room was beautiful, large windows, cream-colored curtains, and a soft bed that looked untouched. The maid placed her bag on a table and said quietly, "If you need anything, ring the bell." Then she left without another word. When the door closed, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space around her. The silence felt loud. She opened her bag, took out a small framed photo of her mother and Sonia, and placed it on the bedside table. The familiar faces gave her comfort in a house that didn't feel like home. Later that evening, Mrs. Verma came to her room. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were warm. "You must be tired, child," she said softly. "This house can be overwhelming at first." Lila nodded. "It's very big," she said quietly. Mrs. Verma smiled faintly. "Yes, too big for one old woman and a few servants. I used to tell Armand that laughter is missing here. Maybe now that will change." Lila didn't know what to say. She didn't feel like someone who could bring laughter to anyone. Mrs. Verma sat beside her. "Tomorrow I will take you to the hospital. You should see him. He has been stable these last few days. Maybe your presence will help." Lila looked down at her hands. "I don't know if he would want me there," she said honestly. Mrs. Verma placed a gentle hand over hers. "You are his wife now, at least in name. That gives you every right. And I believe people in a coma can still feel love even if they can't respond." Lila didn't reply, but her eyes softened. The next morning, she went with Mrs. Verma to the hospital. She wore a simple pale blue sari, her hair neatly tied. The nurses recognized her and whispered to each other as she passed. Lila ignored the looks. When she entered Armand's room, her heart beat faster. He lay still, connected to machines, his face pale but calm. The beeping of the monitor filled the air. She sat beside him and looked at his hands. Strong, tanned, motionless. "Hello," she said softly, feeling foolish for talking to a man who couldn't answer. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm Lila, your wife." The word came out awkwardly, as if it didn't belong to her. She talked about small things. The weather, her school, the strayed dog near the gate that followed her bus every morning. It felt strange at first, but somehow comforting. Talking made the silence less heavy. Days passed that way. Every morning she visited him. She would bring fresh flowers, place them in the vase by his bed, and sit quietly reading from her notebook. Sometimes she read poetry aloud. Sometimes she just sat in silence. The nurses began to smile when they saw her. One of them said, "You're good for him, madam. He seems calmer these days." She didn't know if that was true, but she liked hearing it. When she wasn't at the hospital, Lila spent her time learning about the household. Mrs. Verma showed her how things worked, the staff schedules, the daily routines, the family traditions. It wasn't easy. The servants respected her out of duty, not affection. She often heard whispers when she passed by. "She's not the real one," someone muttered once. "She's just a stand-in." The words stung, but Lila stayed quiet. She had grown used to being overlooked, but now she was being judged for something she hadn't even chosen. One evening, Mrs. Verma invited her for tea in the garden. The air was cool, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the silence between them. "You're doing well," Mrs. Verma said kindly. "The board meeting is next week. I will introduce you to them as Armand's wife. They must believe everything is fine." Lila nodded, though her stomach tightened at the thought. "What if they ask questions?" Mrs. Verma looked at her gently. "Just speak with honesty. You don't have to pretend to be something you're not. Be respectful. Be yourself." Lila managed a small smile. "I can do that." But the next few days were harder than she expected. Reporters had begun waiting outside the hospital and the mansion. News had spread that Armand Verma, the young business tycoon, was critically ill. Some rumors hinted that his mysterious wife was hiding from the media. Once, while leaving the hospital, a reporter shouted, "Madam, how is your husband? Do you believe he will recover?" Lila froze. Cameras flashed. She could barely speak. "He's fighting," she said softly. "And we're praying." Then she quickly got into the car. When she reached home, Mrs. Verma praised her calmness. "You handled it well," she said. "They can twist words easily. Silence is your best defense." That night, Lila sat in her room staring at the rain outside. She missed her old life more than ever. The laughter of her students, the smell of chalk dust, the feeling of belonging somewhere. Now every day felt borrowed. Still, she couldn't help feeling drawn to the man in the hospital bed. There was something peaceful about sitting beside him. She began to wonder what he had been like before the accident. Had he smiled often? Was he kind to people or distant like his house felt? One afternoon, Mrs. Verma handed her a photo album. "You should know the man you married," she said softly. Lila flipped through the pages. There were pictures of Armand as a child, playing in the garden, his face full of laughter. Then as a young man, confident, proud, shaking hands at business events. But there were no photos of him smiling naturally. His eyes always looked serious, almost sad. "He lost his father when he was very young," Mrs. Verma said quietly. "After that, he became hard on himself. He believed emotions made a man weak. I worried about him." Lila closed the album. "He looks lonely," Mrs. Verma nodded slowly. "He was, until Sonia came into his life. She brought light back into it." Lila looked down, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to hear about her sister's love story. It only made her position feel smaller, more temporary. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Armand's face in her mind. The strong jaw, the closed eyes, the stillness. She wondered if he was dreaming. If somewhere inside that deep silence he could feel her voice reaching him. A week later came the board meeting. The large conference room in the mansion was filled with men in suits. They stood when Mrs. Verma entered, and their eyes shifted to Lila as she followed quietly behind. "This is Mrs. Lila Verma," Mrs. Verma announced proudly, Armand's wife. A murmur spread through the room. Lila could feel their skepticism. One of them, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, asked, "When did the marriage take place?" Mrs. Verma answered smoothly, "Shortly before the accident." "And the papers?" "They're all legal." Mrs. Verma said firmly. The man nodded, though his expression stayed doubtful. After the meeting, several board members approached Lila politely but coldly. They asked questions about Armand's health, about the household, about her background. She answered with honesty and simplicity. When she didn't know something, she said so. It made them look surprised, but a few seemed impressed by her sincerity. After they left, Mrs. Verma smiled. "You did wonderfully," she said. "They'll think twice before trying to take control now." For the first time in weeks, Lila felt a small sense of pride. Maybe she wasn't completely powerless after all. That evening, she returned to the hospital. The nurse smiled as she entered. "He seems to respond when you're around," she said. His heart rate becomes steadier. Lila sat beside him and took his hand gently. "You're fighting, aren't you?" she whispered. "That's good, because I'm getting tired of talking to myself." For a moment, she thought she saw his eyelids twitch. Her breath caught. She leaned closer. But then nothing. The machine kept beeping the same steady rhythm. Still, her heart felt lighter that night. The next few days became a quiet rhythm of duty and hope. Mornings at the hospital, afternoons managing small household matters, evenings reading by Armand's bedside. Slowly, the servants' attitudes softened. They began to greet her with genuine respect. One of them, the cook, once said, "Madam, the master was lucky. You are gentle." Maybe that's what he needed. Lila smiled faintly. "Maybe he just needs peace," she replied. Then one morning, something happened that changed everything. Lila was sitting by Armand's bed, reading aloud from a book. Her voice was calm, slow, almost like a lullaby. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, a soft groan. Her eyes shot up. His fingers moved slightly. She froze, unsure if she imagined it. Then his hand twitched again. "Doctor," she called out, her voice trembling. Nurses rushed in, followed by the doctor. They checked his vitals, eyes wide with surprise. "He's responding," the doctor said. "This is a good sign." Lila stood aside, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Verma arrived moments later, breathless. When the doctor told her the news, she covered her mouth and whispered, "Thank you, God." Lila didn't know why she was crying so much. Maybe relief, maybe fear. Everything was about to change again. That night, as she sat alone in her room, she couldn't stop thinking, when he wakes up, what will he think of her? Will he hate her for being in his life? For being part of something that wasn't hers? She looked out at the night sky, whispering to herself, "Please wake up, but please don't hate me when you do." In the stillness of that grand, lonely house, the wind carried her words away. Somewhere across the city, in a hospital room full of quiet machines, a man's fingers twitched again, stronger this time, as if answering a call he couldn't yet understand. When the doctor said the words, "He's showing signs of waking up," Lila felt her whole body go still. She didn't move, didn't even breathe for a second. It felt like time had stopped around her. For weeks, she had been coming to this hospital room talking to a man who couldn't reply. Now that man, her husband by name but a stranger by heart, was finally coming back. Mrs. Verma was crying quietly beside her. "I knew he would fight," she whispered, clutching Lila's hand. "He's strong, my son. He won't give up so easily." Lila tried to smile, but her heart was beating too fast. What would happen now? Would everything she had done, all the pretending, the marriage papers, the daily visits, come crashing down the moment he opened his eyes? That night, Lila stayed at the hospital even after the doctors left. She sat near his bed, watching the slow movement of his fingers. His eyelids trembled sometimes, as if he was dreaming. She whispered softly, "It's okay. You can wake up now. Everything is fine. Everyone is waiting for you." She wanted to sound calm, but her voice shook. She didn't know if she was ready for this moment. The next morning, she was still there when the nurse entered. "You should rest, madam," the nurse said kindly. "You've been sitting here all night." "I'll rest after he opens his eyes," Lila replied with a small smile. A few hours later, just before noon, she saw it happen. His hand moved again, this time more clearly. His head turned slightly to one side. Lila stood up quickly, calling the doctor. The nurse ran to get him, and then slowly Armand's eyes opened. For a moment he looked lost, like someone waking from a long dream. His gaze wandered across the room, landing on the bright window, then on the machines beside him. Finally, his eyes stopped on Lila. She froze under his stare. He looked at her for a long time, confused, trying to make sense of her face. His lips moved slightly, his voice dry and weak. "Who are you?" Lila's throat tightened. She stepped closer, trying to stay calm. "You're safe," she said softly. "You've been in the hospital. You had an accident." He blinked slowly as if trying to remember. "Where's Sonia?" he asked. Lila felt her stomach drop. Her mouth went dry. Before she could answer, Mrs. Verma entered the room, her face bright with tears. "Armin," she cried, moving closer to him. "My son, thank God you're awake." He looked at her weakly. "Ma," he whispered, his voice shaking. She took his hand and kissed it. "You're okay now. You just rest." The doctor arrived, asking questions and checking his pulse. They told him not to strain himself, not to speak too much yet. But even through his exhaustion, Armin kept glancing at Lila with confusion. When the doctor left, Mrs. Verma said softly, "Armin, don't worry about anything. Everything is under control. Just focus on getting better." He nodded slowly, then looked again at Lila. "Who is she?" Mrs. Verma hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward Lila for a brief second. "This is your wife," she said quietly. The words hung in the air like thunder. Armand's eyes widened. "What?" His voice was hoarse but sharp. "My wife, what are you talking about?" Mrs. Verma tried to calm him. "Don't get upset, Beta. You were supposed to marry Sonia, but Sonia—" He interrupted, struggling to sit up. "Where is Sonia?" "She's alive," Mrs. Verma said quickly. "But she's still recovering." Armin's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Then why are you saying—" He looked at Lila again, disbelief flashing across his face. "Who is she? Why is she here?" Lila's hands trembled. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Everything she had feared since the wedding was happening right before her eyes. Mrs. Verma placed a hand on his arm. "Please, Armin, you were both in danger. There were circumstances. We had to act fast. To protect your name, your company, and Sonia's dignity." Lila stepped in to help. He stared at his mother, anger and confusion battling in his tired eyes. "You made her marry me? Without my consent?" "It was the only way," Mrs. Verma said softly. "I know you're angry, but it was necessary." Armin turned his gaze toward Lila again, his voice trembling. "And you agreed to this?" Lila's lips parted. "I didn't want to," she said quietly. "But your mother said it was the only way to protect everyone. I only did what I was asked." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he closed his eyes and turned his head away. "Leave me alone," he muttered weakly. "All of you, please." Mrs. Verma looked heartbroken, but she nodded to Lila, signaling her to step out. Outside the room, Lila stood in the corridor, her hands cold and shaking. She heard her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. The nurse walked past, smiling gently, unaware of what had just happened. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in the mansion, staring out at the rain. She had known this day would come, but not like this. Not with so much anger in his eyes. She whispered to herself, "He has every right to hate me." Over the next few days, Armin began to recover quickly. His strength returned faster than the doctors expected. But his silence toward Lila was painful. Whenever she entered his hospital room, he would look away. If she tried to speak, he would answer in short, cold words. Mrs. Verma tried to ease the tension, but even she could feel the distance growing between them. Once, when she wasn't around, Armin spoke to Lila directly for the first time since waking up. His voice was calm but sharp. "You can stop pretending now," he said. Lila looked up, startled. "I'm not pretending," she said quietly. He laughed bitterly. "You think I don't see what's happening? You're living in my house, acting like a wife, enjoying my mother's affection. For what? Money? Security?" His words cut deep, but Lila didn't react. She simply said, "You don't know me." "No," he said coldly. "And I don't want to." She stood there for a moment, looking at him. There were so many things she wanted to explain, but she knew it wouldn't matter. His heart was closed. When she turned to leave, he said one more thing. "Don't expect this marriage to mean anything to me." She didn't reply. She just walked out quietly, tears blurring her vision. At home, Mrs. Verma noticed her red eyes and asked gently, "Did he say something harsh?" Lila shook her head. "He's hurt, ma'am." "Anyone would be," Mrs. Verma sighed. "He'll understand one day. Give him time." Days passed, and Armin was discharged from the hospital. The doctors said he needed rest at home, so he returned to the mansion. The media had started speculating again, calling it a miracle recovery. Lila stayed out of sight, doing what needed to be done quietly. When Armin entered the house for the first time since the accident, he paused in the main hall, looking around. Everything was the same, the paintings, the furniture, the smell of roses, but it all felt strange to him now. Mrs. Verma held his arm gently. "Welcome home, Beta." He smiled faintly, but his eyes drifted to Lila, who was standing a few steps away. She lowered her gaze, unsure if she should speak. He said nothing and walked past her. Later that night, Lila took dinner to his room, as Mrs. Verma had requested. When she entered, he was sitting by the window looking out at the garden. "I brought your food," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "You can leave it there." She placed the tray on the table and hesitated. "You should eat something." "I said leave it," he repeated. She stood there for a second, then nodded. "Good night," she whispered, and quietly left. In the days that followed, Armin began working again, even from home. He spoke often with his business associates, catching up on the company's affairs. The staff noticed his sharpness returning, his old confidence slowly resurfacing. But every time Lila passed by, he went silent. One afternoon, there was a sudden problem. A board member named Mr. Coma had called for an emergency meeting, threatening to challenge Armin's leadership, claiming he was unfit to handle the company after the accident. Mrs. Verma was worried. "He's trying to take advantage of your weakness," she said to her son. Armin frowned. "Let him try. I'm not going anywhere." But when the meeting began the next day, Coma brought up the topic of Armin's mysterious marriage. "You claim to be fine, Armin, but you've made decisions while unconscious. How can we trust your judgment? Who even is this woman you married?" The words echoed in the room. Everyone turned to look at Lila, who had come with Mrs. Verma for support. Armin's jaw tightened. He looked at her briefly, then at the men in front of him. For a long moment, silence filled the air. Then, surprisingly, he spoke. "She's my wife," he said firmly. "And she saved my company when I couldn't." The room fell silent. Coma looked taken aback. "What do you mean?" Armin leaned forward. "While I was unconscious, she signed documents, faced the media, and protected this company's image. She did what none of you dared to do. So if you have questions about her, direct them to me, because she stands under my name and I stand by it." Lila stared at him, stunned. She didn't know what to feel. Relief, gratitude, or confusion. When the meeting ended, everyone left quietly, some looking impressed, others thoughtful. Later, Mrs. Verma hugged her son. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You did the right thing." But Armin only nodded slightly and walked away. He didn't look at Lila. That night, she found him in the garden, standing by the fountain. She approached slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't turn around. "I didn't do it for you," he said flatly. "I did it because they insulted my name. That's all." Lila nodded, her eyes glistening. "I understand." She began to walk away, but he suddenly said, "Why didn't you tell me the truth that day? Why didn't you say no to all of this?" She stopped. "I tried," she said softly. "But your mother said it was the only way to protect your family. And I couldn't say no to her when she was crying." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, something in his eyes softened, but it disappeared quickly. "You should have refused," he said quietly. "Maybe," she replied, "but I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Then she turned and left. That night, for the first time, Armin couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her words, about the quiet strength in her voice. He had assumed she was just another person after his wealth, but nothing in her behavior supported that. She didn't demand anything. She didn't complain, she just stayed. Days turned into weeks again. Armin recovered completely. Lila continued to handle small tasks around the house, helping Mrs. Verma, avoiding attention. One evening, as she was arranging flowers in the living room, she heard Armin's voice behind her. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She turned. "It keeps me busy." He nodded slightly. "I was wrong about you," he said after a pause. Lila blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I thought you were part of some plan," he admitted. "But now I see. You were just trying to help." She smiled faintly. "I didn't want anything from you. I only wanted peace for your family, and mine." He looked at her quietly for a moment, then said, "Peace isn't easy to find in this house, but maybe you're changing that. It was the first time his words didn't sound cold. From that day, things between them began to shift. Slowly, quietly, like dawn after a long night. He didn't smile yet, but the anger in his eyes softened. He began to speak to her more, sometimes even share short conversations about the company or Mrs. Verma's health. And every night, when Lila prayed before sleeping, she whispered softly, "Thank you, God, for letting him wake up." She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger in that big, lonely house. She was still afraid of what would happen when Sonia woke up, but for now, she chose to live one peaceful day at a time, even if the peace was fragile. And in another part of the city, under the quiet lights of a hospital room, Sonia's fingers moved slightly in her sleep, unnoticed, but certain, like a shadow of the storm yet to come. The days inside the Verma mansion had started feeling lighter, almost peaceful. The sharp silence that once filled the hallways had softened into quiet calm. Armin had begun to speak to Lila without bitterness now. Their conversations were still short, but they no longer cut like glass. He sometimes joined her at breakfast, not saying much, just sitting across the table. And though they rarely made eye contact, there was no anger in his gaze anymore. It was strange but comforting in its own way. Lila had learned the rhythm of the house now, the way the morning light hit the rose garden, the sound of Mrs. Verma's soft prayers, the footsteps of the house staff echoing on the marble floor. For the first time since her unexpected marriage, she didn't feel like an outsider, but peace, as always, was short-lived. One evening, while Lila was helping Mrs. Verma organize some papers in the study, the phone rang. It was the hospital. Mrs. Verma answered, and as she listened, the color drained from her face. When she hung up, her voice trembled. "Sonia, she's awake." Lila's hand froze on the edge of the desk. She felt the air leave her lungs. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The ticking of the old clock filled the silence between them. Finally, Mrs. Verma whispered, "She woke up this morning. The doctor said she's weak but conscious." Lila forced herself to nod. "That's good news," she said quietly, even though her heart was pounding. Mrs. Verma looked at her, as if she understood what Lila wasn't saying. "You've done so much for us, dear. You don't have to worry. We'll handle this carefully." Lila smiled faintly, but inside her thoughts were swirling. What would happen now? Sonia was the woman Armand was meant to marry, the one he had loved. And now that she was back, where did that leave Lila? That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the moonlight stretch across the garden. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock struck 12. Its sound deep and hollow. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, maybe this was always meant to end like this. The next morning, Mrs. Verma told Armin the news. He stood silent for a long time after hearing it. His expression was unreadable, but Lila could see the storm in his eyes. "When can I see her?" he asked finally. "The doctor said tomorrow," Mrs. Verma replied softly. "They want her to rest for a day before meeting anyone." He nodded and walked out of the room quietly. Lila stood there, her heart aching but calm. She knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The woman he once loved was alive, and she would soon be in front of him again. The following day, Armin left early for the hospital. Lila watched him go from the upstairs window. He didn't look back once. Mrs. Verma placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, child," she said gently. "Whatever happens, you've done nothing wrong." "You've only given kindness," Lila smiled weakly. "That's all I could offer." At the hospital, Armin stood outside Sonia's room for a long time before going in. Through the glass window, he saw her lying there, pale but awake. When he finally stepped inside, she turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "You came." He moved closer. "Of course I did." She smiled faintly, her eyes filling with tears. "They said you were hurt, that you might not make it." "I'm fine now," he said gently. "You don't have to worry anymore." She reached out and he took her hand carefully. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The room felt filled with all the things they wanted to say but couldn't yet. After a moment, Sonia frowned slightly. "Why do people keep calling me your sister?" Armand froze. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. "The nurses," she said, her voice weak but curious. "They said your wife came to see me once." "Your wife? I thought they meant me, but..." "Then they said her name was Lila." Armand looked away. It's a long story, he said quietly. You need to rest now. Sonia didn't press him, but her eyes followed him closely as he stood to leave. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Verma told Lila that Sonia would need weeks of recovery before coming home. Lila nodded, though her stomach tightened. Weeks weren't much time. She knew eventually they'd all have to face the truth together. In the following days, Armin visited Sonia often. He didn't talk much about it when he came home, but Lila noticed small things. How his expression softened after each visit. How sometimes he smiled faintly at old memories. She couldn't blame him. He had loved Sonia once. Maybe he still did. Yet something strange was happening too. When Armin came home and saw Lila in the kitchen helping the cook, he would pause at the doorway for a second. Sometimes he asked her about her day or about the house accounts. Simple things, but they mattered. One evening he found her sitting in the garden with a cup of tea. He joined her quietly. You look tired, he said softly. She smiled. Maybe a little. He hesitated. You've done more than anyone could have expected. I don't say it often, but... Thank you, she looked at him, surprised. You don't have to thank me. I just did what felt right. He nodded slowly. Still, I owe you, she shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I only hope everything turns out well. There was a pause, and then he asked, And what about you? What happens to you when all this is over? Lila looked down at her hands. I haven't thought about that yet. He wanted to say something more, but he didn't. Instead, they sat quietly, listening to the sound of crickets in the garden. A few days later, Sonia was discharged and brought home. The mansion seemed to come alive with movement again. Staff running around, fresh flowers everywhere, soft music playing. Everyone wanted to make her feel comfortable. When Lila saw her for the first time after the accident, Sonia looked fragile, but beautiful. Her eyes, though tired, still had that same spark that had drawn people to her before. Hello, Lila said softly. Welcome home, Sonia smiled faintly. Thank you. Her tone was polite but cautious. She seemed to be studying Lila, trying to understand her place in the house. Mrs. Verma tried to bridge the distance between them. Lila has been a blessing for us, she said gently. She took care of everything when we were broken. Sonia nodded but didn't reply. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed. It wasn't hostile, but it was tense. Sonia moved around with slow steps, still regaining her strength. Armin was attentive, helping her when needed, but there was a heaviness in his manner, like something unsaid lingered between them. Lila, meanwhile, stayed in the background. She made sure Sonia had everything she needed but kept her distance. One evening, as she was placing flowers in the hallway, she overheard Sonia speaking with Armin in the study. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Sonia's voice was low but trembling. That you were married to her? Armin sighed. Because it wasn't a real marriage. It was done to protect you, the company, everything. You were in danger and the media wouldn't stop asking questions. My mother thought it was the best way to calm things. So you married her while I was in a coma, Sonia said quietly. Yes, he said, his voice soft but firm. It was only on paper. Lila froze in the corridor, her chest tight. After a moment, Sonia asked, And now? What happens now that I'm back? There was a long pause before Armin answered. I don't know. Lila stepped back quietly, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't want to eavesdrop anymore. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. That night, she wrote a small note and placed it on her bedside table. When the time comes, I'll leave quietly. No one needs to ask me to go. The next morning, Mrs. Verma noticed Lila's quietness. You're not eating well these days, she said softly over breakfast. Lila smiled faintly. Just not hungry, that's all. Mrs. Verma looked at her for a long time. She wasn't fooled. She could sense that something was breaking inside the young woman who had held everything together when everyone else had fallen apart. Later that week, the family decided to host a small dinner to celebrate Sonia's recovery. It wasn't a big party, just close friends and business associates. Lila helped with the preparations, making sure everything was perfect. When the evening arrived, the mansion glowed with warm lights and soft music. Sonia looked stunning in a pale blue sari. Armin stood beside her, greeting guests, smiling politely. Lila stayed behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly. but as the evening went on, people began to notice her. A few whispered questions floated through the room. Isn't that the wife? I thought Sonia was his fiancé. Armand noticed too. He excused himself and went to find Lila. He found her in the kitchen, checking the dessert trays. You don't have to hide back here, he said. She looked up, startled. I'm not hiding. Just working, he shook his head. Come outside. You belong there as much as anyone else. She hesitated, then said quietly, You know that's not true. He sighed. Lila. Before he could say more, a servant entered saying that Sonia was looking for him. He nodded and walked out. Lila stood there for a moment, then smiled sadly. It's okay, she whispered to herself. After the dinner ended and the guests left, Sonia approached Lila. Her tone was calm, but there was a sharpness underneath. I heard you took care of everything while I was gone, she said. Lila nodded. I only did what needed to be done. Sonia studied her face for a long moment. You seem kind. I'm grateful for what you did. Thank you, Lila said softly. But I hope you understand, Sonia continued. Things can't stay this way forever. Lila met her eyes and nodded. I understand. There was no anger between them, just quiet truth. That night, Armand found Lila sitting outside on the steps of the garden, staring up at the stars. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low. She nodded slowly. Yes, I'm just thinking about everything. He sat beside her. You don't have to leave, you know, he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. She looked at him. But one day I will. You and Sonia deserve your life back. He looked away. You talk as if you were never part of that life. She smiled faintly. Maybe I wasn't meant to be. He didn't reply, but his eyes said things his mouth couldn't. When she finally stood up to go inside, he called her name softly. Whatever happens, I want you to know something. You've changed this house. You've changed me. Her throat tightened. And you've taught me what strength really means. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the night wind carrying the scent of jasmine through the air. But in both their hearts, they knew the peace wouldn't last forever. The truth was too big, the past too heavy. And soon, decisions would have to be made, ones that could change all their lives again. The morning after the dinner, the mansion felt strangely quiet. The laughter, the soft music, and the sparkle from the night before were all gone. Only silence remained, heavy and thoughtful. Lila woke early as usual. She went to the kitchen, made tea for Mrs. Verma, and started helping the staff tidy up after the event. But her heart wasn't in it today. Every movement felt slow, as if time itself had thickened around her. She knew the moment she'd been dreading was coming closer. She could feel it in every glance, every whisper, every look between Armand and Sonia. Sonia had regained her strength quickly. Within a week, she was walking around the house with her old grace, smiling at guests, calling people by name. Everyone could see she was returning to her old self, but there was something different in her eyes whenever she looked at Lila, something quiet and questioning, as if she couldn't quite understand her. One afternoon, Sonia called Lila into her room. The air was calm, sunlight spilling through the curtains, dust particles floating lazily in the golden light. Sit, Sonia said softly. Lila sat down, her palms folded on her lap. I wanted to talk to you, Sonia began, about everything that's happened. Lila nodded. Of course, Sonia looked at her for a long moment. I've been trying to remember the days before the accident, she said slowly. Bits and pieces are still missing. But I remember something. I remember the night before we were supposed to get engaged. Lila waited quietly. You came to the house, Sonia continued. You were wearing that green dress. You smiled at me and said you were happy for me. Lila nodded faintly. Yes, I was. Sonia's lips curved in a sad smile. You always were kind. You never competed with me, never argued. You were just there, quiet, gentle. She paused. That's why it's strange. All this time I kept wondering, how did you end up married to him? Lila looked down. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said softly. But your mother needed someone to stand in for you. The media wouldn't stop, the investors were panicking, and your family was breaking apart. I only did what they asked me to. Sonia nodded slowly. So it wasn't your choice? Lila smiled sadly. No, but I still accepted it. Because it was the right thing to do then. There was a long pause. Then Sonia said, "And now? What will you do now?" Lila took a deep breath. "Now that you're back, I'll leave. I've already spoken to Mrs. Verma about it." Sonia frowned slightly. "Leave? Why?" Lila hesitated, then said gently, "Because this was never my life." "It was yours." Sonia looked at her for a moment, then quietly said, "Does he know?" Lila shook her head. "Not yet, but he'll understand." That evening, Mrs. Verma found Lila packing a small suitcase in her room. "Where are you going?" she asked, alarmed. Lila turned, smiling faintly. "Please don't stop me, ma'am. You know this day had to come." Mrs. Verma's eyes filled with tears. "You're leaving us?" Lila nodded slowly. "You have your family whole again." "That's all I wanted. You were kind to me when I had nothing. You gave me a place, a name, and respect. I'll never forget that." Mrs. Verma took her hands in hers. "You were more than a name, Lila. You became part of this family." Lila smiled through her tears. "That's the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me." Before she could say more, the door opened behind her. Armin stood there, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Verma turned away, unable to speak. Lila looked down, then said, "I'm leaving." His brows furrowed. "Leaving? Why?" "Because Sonia's back," she said softly. "Everything is as it should be. You don't need me here anymore." Armin stepped closer. "You can't just walk away." Lila's voice trembled slightly. "I never belonged here, Armin. I was just filling in until you were both safe again. Now you are." He took a deep breath. "And what about me?" She looked up at him, confused. "What about you?" He hesitated. "Do you think it's that simple for me? That I can just go back to how things were before?" Lila looked into his eyes, seeing something she hadn't before. Something soft, uncertain, almost fragile. "You loved her once," she said gently. "Maybe you still do." He didn't answer immediately.